Welcome, friends, to our annual Malden Reads service, where I and we read the book that Malden has picked for its One City, One Book initiative, and then I preach on the topic of the book. And you don't have to read the book to be able to be here, so if you haven't finished it or read it at all, that's okay. This year's book is Our Missing Hearts by Celeste Ng, a Chinese-American author who lives in Cambridge, a first-generation U.S.-American born to immigrant parents from Hong Kong. And when you open Celeste Ng's Blue Sky, the first thing you see when you do this is the pin page for Lucé's hotline. See ICE, it says, call and report, 617-370-5023. If you keep scrolling, you see posts about a No Kings rally next week, about another about a law that would protect the freedom to read in Massachusetts. I learned that a banned book in schools in the US, in Florida, is a kid's book called Dim Sum for Everyone, about a Chinese-American family enjoying dim sum together. Too diverse, according to some counties in Florida. Can't have anything that might be cultural representation of what? Non-white American families? Celeste Ng writes that it was a book she read as a child hundreds of times, and I choke back the what? The bile, the tears, my disgust and sadness in equal measure, and how a book could be deemed too diverse simply because it's not about a certain kind of family. It seems that Celeste Ng lives her values in the real world. And so, like I said, if you haven't read the book, don't worry. It's close enough to reality for it to not matter, I think. The Ng's words are more beautiful, more poignant than the words of broadcast news and late-night doom scrolling can ever hope to reach. It's a book about a near-future world where Asian American hate has ballooned and people are arrested, children are taken away from their families for anti-American belief, which most often means belief supporting anything deemed too Asian, specifically too Chinese. It's a book about banning books, about an author whose poems become more than she imagined. It's a book about a Chinese-American mother and her biracial child and the lengths she goes to keep him safe. It's a book about how art can help fight injustice and about how sometimes the way you fight injustice finds you and grabs you and won't let you go. It's about human connections and the stories that bind us. It's about a future that looks like ours and isn't ours and is ours. At the end of the book, after it's over in the author notes, Celeste Ng writes, Bird and Margaret, the protagonists, their world isn't exactly our world, but it isn't not ours either. Most of the events and occurrences in this book do not have direct analogs, but I drew information from many real-life events, both past and current, and in some cases, things I imagined had become realities by the time the novel was done. The book was published in 2022, written beginning at the start of Donald Trump's first presidency in 2016, when children were being kept in cages at the border, and finished during the pandemic, when Asian American hate reached a new high. And yet in reading this book, I felt like it could be describing an only slightly modified 2016, where the top group being attacked were Asian Americans and not immigrants from Central and South America or Muslims, which is not to say that Asian Americans and Asian immigrants haven't been impacted by ICE. There are ICE sweeps happening in Asian American communities. Visa policies are changing what has impacted many students from Asian countries, which is where most international students are from. Perhaps it's this false narrative that they are safe that actually makes the book more important. Perhaps the narrative that there is only one or two groups that are affected makes it easier to separate us, to push claims that only one type of immigrant has it easy, which is simply not true, unless you're a white immigrant from Canada, like me. Now, the story begins by following a 12-year-old biracial boy whose mother is a Chinese American and whose father is white. And his mother, a poet, leaves when he's 9 years old, and he doesn't know why. But eventually, and here's where our reading comes in, he begins to see words, and they're words that she wrote in a poem, all over the place, used as a rallying cry against the laws that take these children away. Our missing hearts, it says. Where are the missing hearts? The words of his mother, part of a movement against this unjust law. But he doesn't know where she is or what she's doing, but her words, they live far beyond her. This month, at First Parish in Malden, as we examine our theme of stories, we think about who writes the stories. And the book brings up so many questions about that, about the propaganda that gets spun on news stations and in classrooms to convince us of a certain narrative, and about the art of resistance, the stories we cling to help us find seeds of hope, to remind us that things don't have to be this way, to help us see that, as Celeste Ng said in an interview, people still laugh when the world is ending. We still make meaning even through heartbreak. There is joy alongside despair. But it's also a story about the author writing a book she didn't want to write, but poured through her nonetheless. It's hard to ignore the backdrop of when Ng wrote the book. But the thing is, she wanted to write just a story about a family not unlike her own, with a Chinese-American mother and a biracial son. She wanted to write a story about a mother who's an artist, perhaps an author like her, and a son who couldn't understand why she loved her art so much, perhaps even more than him. But writing a story in 2016 brought the reality of what was happening to her. Children in cages, writing through 2020 brought hatred during the pandemic, where the administration originally called it the China flu. This hate against Asian Americans, what would this look like, she wondered, just a few years in the future? And she tried to leave anti-Asian sentiment out of the story. I'm sure you can imagine why. The focus on her family, the fear that her publisher would only think that it was of interest to Asian audiences, as if we don't have something to learn from perspectives that are different from our own. But sometimes stories come forth out of us without us having a choice. And she said this is what happened to her. I'm reminded of the Old Testament and Hebrew prophets who said, "Not me, God," when they were asked to do prophetic things. We Unitarian Universalists see prophets in our own times, in the words and deeds of people who share their wisdom with us. I think Celeste Ng certainly qualifies, perhaps especially because she tried to avoid it. Perhaps, for me, the most poignant and difficult part of the book was its focus on children and how children are taken away from their families, and how one of the novel's two protagonists, Margaret, does whatever she can to keep her son, Bird, the other protagonist, safe, including leaving him in the care of her white husband with no contact with him after age 9, so that he's not taken away from at least one of the parents that cares for him because of anti-American sentiments. People are making these kinds of choices in our communities right now. In one scene where they're talking about how any book that talks about China or Asia or is by Chinese or East Asian authors were removed from libraries, Margaret, one of the protagonists, says, "Those librarians, it was cowardly for them to remove those books." And the librarian who is telling this story says, "Well, they've got children too, you know." This line stopped me. Most people I know who have children would do anything to keep them safe. In the moments that I've wondered about how I can participate in resistance right now, whether it might lead to danger to myself, the calculation changed when I had children. Now it's what will keep them safe. I take fewer risks. I think about it differently. Would I remove books from a library because I wanted to keep them safe? Because that was what was asked of me? Threatened? On one hand, I hope not. I'd hope I'd stick to my values. But on the other hand, I might. Perhaps I hope I would protect my children at all costs. What's the line? I think so many of us have wondered this, and many people have had to make these choices these days. There's a message here in this book that it's easy to ignore the things when they aren't happening to you, to your family. That it's easy to continue going, doing whatever it is you did before the laws were changed, before the dystopian narrative was written, before ICE was in the streets, before war rained down on faraway countries in our names. Until something comes and grabs you and makes you a part of it. Outside these doors, people are being kidnapped. Some of us have loved ones who have already been taken, forcibly detained or deported away from the life they've been living and know. Parents taken away from their children. Decisions made to keep children safe every day. But families, as they debate how to walk their children to school, or go to their jobs. Just this week, the little boy in Minneapolis, Liam Conejo Ramos, the one who was photographed wearing a blue bunny hat as he was detained, was denied their asylum claim, ordered deported to Ecuador. A family who came here for safety, to do whatever they could for their child, subject to things that no family should go through, making these children are unsafe, our missing hearts. Meanwhile, we write stories. The poem in this book, Our Missing Hearts, begins, "Our missing hearts, scattered to sprout everywhere," originally written about pomegranate seeds, adopted as a motto for those missing their children, their hearts. And the people of Ng's world are reminded of the stories of the children who have been taken from their families, and the hope that they will be reunited is instilled. Meanwhile, we create art. Art installations like the one that was up in Boston by Victor Marca 27 Quiñones. It's made up of coolers, and it features a mother breastfeeding. And on the back, inside the coolers, images representing the many immigrant groups here in Massachusetts and across the country, including Asian and South American cultures. And on the perimeter of the art, there are seals of the United States with the word Inhumane and Cruelty Enforcement, ICE, and the U.S. Department of Stolen Land Security. You can take that down. Quiñones says of his art, blending ancestral symbolism with contemporary survival tools, the installation reclaims space and uplifts the beauty, resilience, and cultural power of marginalized communities. These coolers carry more than food or flowers. They carry stories, they carry legacy, they carry dreams. And the people of our world are reminded that each family separated is an individual story, and that they too can be reunited, returned, given the gift of justice that they so deserve. Celeste Ng says in an interview that she believes it's important to hear these individual stories, and that a story like the one in her book is so much more powerful than the stories we sometimes hear on the news because it's individualized. She likens it to gun violence. It's very different to hear 20 people who are victims of gun violence than it is to hear about the individual stories. And remember that each of these people has a world beyond that moment. One of the themes of her book is about these individual stories and making sure that we hear them and really understand them, because they are what humanizes the issue for us. Okay, I've never done this before, but I do want to give a spoiler for the book. And I'm looking at people who I know haven't finished it. You can walk out if you want, or turn that. I will be quick for those who haven't heard it. I will wave my arms like this when I'm done with the spoiler, and somebody can invite Kristen back in, and you can put your camera on mute. All right, thank you, everybody. So one of the things, I'm waiting for Arthur to leave. Oh, he's closing the door, okay. There's a question about whether the ending of the book brings hope, and I wanted to talk about that because I do believe that it does. One of the things that Margaret the poet does is that she spends the time she's away from her son collecting stories of all those who have had their children taken away from them. And then she plants tiny speakers all over New York City, ones that are hard to find and hard to destroy, that this is the project that she's working on, right? And so what she does is she broadcasts the stories of all of those who are taken. She writes about what happened, but she also writes the stories of their lives, the sweet stories about what happened to them. She says she wants people to remember more than their name, more than their faces, more than what happened to them, more than simple last facts that they were taken. Each of their names needs to be remembered as a person unlike any other. Not a name on a list, but as someone unlike anyone else. And this changes people. We don't necessarily see all of it, but this act of resistance is remembered by people throughout their lives. It might not be the single thing that changes the tide, but you can imagine a world where hearing this changes us. Stories change us. We have to listen to the stories. Okay, you can bring her back in, or anybody else. The spoiler is done. I think that brings hope. Who writes the stories? It's the loved ones of every person taken. It's the ones that have enough safety to speak out. It's the artist who reminds us that each cooler is a story. It's the words of Liam Conejo Ramos' father about their experiences in detention and how scary it was for them. It's in the book that allows us to get to know someone whose life mirrors that of someone taken by ICE today. It's these stories that can give us truth and give us hope. Remind us that humans are experiencing this. And conversely, it's the stories that encourage us to keep working. That there is hope if we work together. That times won't always be this way. They don't always have to be this way. The stories that make us see our shared humanity. So read the stories. Listen to the stories. Engage with the art. It reminds us that there is still beauty and hope and humanity, individually as we work for collective liberation. May it be so. And let us say together, Amen. Amen.